Chapter 3, German Officer on Counteracting Nazi Teaching. "Thank God we have played our trump card today," so said a German officer of some standing, as he found his wife and me drinking coffee under a tree in a garden on the outskirts of Berlin late one afternoon in August in 1936. "Tomorrow it will be announced publicly that our compulsory military training will be for 2 years, instead of only for 1 year." "But why trump card?" I replied. "Do you mean the Army's trump card in its preparation for war?" "Not at all," he said. "I mean our trump card against the Nazis." "Fritz, for goodness sake, be careful what you say. Remember we are in the garden, and one never knows who listens over garden walls," said his wife. "You are right," he replied, adding rather irritably, "How sick I get of this need for caution. We cannot now have the most ordinary conversation without behaving as though we were gangsters plotting murder. However, it's quite true that what I want to tell you is better not heard by the Nazis, so let's go inside." "You asked if the 2 years military service is a preparation for war." "No, not directly, although many of us agree that every year since the last war looks less like peace, and it is important that Germany should be prepared for anything." "Anything the Nazis lead her into?" I asked. "Yes, if you like, though it is not only the Nazis that make Europe restless. But we will not quarrel over that just now. Let us talk of the present," he said. "At the moment, the Nazi Party is trying to take over the whole education of our nation, and it seems to make the teaching it gives in all the party organizations more important than the teaching the young get either in the schools or the home or even in the church. Now, many of us are very concerned about much of this Nazi teaching, which is false. So that by trump card I mean, and many other German officers would agree with me, we have found that if the German youth goes first into the Hitler Jugend and then the Labor Front, it takes more than 1 year to knock all the Nazi nonsense out of them when they come to us. Thank God, now we shall get them for 2 years, and we shall have a better chance, because almost the entire young manhood of Germany passes through our ranks, and in many ways we can do something to break down the pagan and stupid ideas they have learnt before they came to the army." We sat talking for some hours, during which the nephew joined us. It was obvious that these two represented, not perhaps a large, but a very significant group of German officers who really seemed to feel something akin to a sense of mission in their task as German officers in face of so much that was false in Nazi teaching. "You see, we do not exactly enter into any controversy over Nazi teaching by attacking it, but we try to re-inculcate a belief in the Christian religion by positive teaching, or even more by letting the men see how highly some of their officers estimate the church and what it stands for. Also, we quite openly oppose much of the Nazi anti-Semitic teaching, and indirectly we try to make them realize that universities and schools and places of learning should not be interfered with by party agencies. So much of the National Socialism is cheap and vulgar. Even its teaching on discipline and simplicity, which might be good, is based on wrong assumptions. We do not think that up to now the Nazi teaching has gone very deep in many young men, and we believe that in some way we can re-educate the German youth during their military training." "Yes," joined in the nephew. "Don't you see how much more the thrilling our task as officers is? For now it is not only to make good soldiers, but to re-educate German citizens. Because," he added, with the almost light-hearted confidence of many Germans not in the party, "much of the Nazi teaching will die quite soon. It's such nonsense. But in the meantime, I think German officers have a wonderful opportunity." Then Herr von Arnsberg, looking across at me with a face that had grown serious, said, "I hope we do not give you false impressions, because we are deeply indebted to Hitler." He saw the look of surprise on my face. Let me explain. I and many other officers will now spend much of our time and thought in trying all sorts of ways to teach what is in direct opposition to most of the Nazi teaching. But that does not mean that as German officers we can never forget the gratitude and allegiance we owe to Adolf Hitler. You see, the German army had fallen into disrepute. It scarcely existed. It was dishonored and discredited and suffered every sort of indignity. Adolf Hitler has brought it back to the place of supreme importance in the life of our nation, and above all, to a place of honor. This we must never forget, and we remain true in our allegiance to him, however much we may work against his teaching when it means the wrong education of our youth. Then, as the last streak of light faded behind the pine trees, Herr von Arnsberg added, speaking more to himself than to me, "Yes, our oath is to Adolf Hitler, who restored the German army. Would to God he had been a gentleman, a Christian, and an officer. He is a decorator, a pagan, and a civilian, but to him we are bound by military oath and by eternal gratitude." When I was left alone with the young officer, he turned to me, perhaps realizing that I felt rather horrified by what his uncle had said about allegiance to Hitler, and said, "You do see my uncle is right, don't you? His generation suffered most deeply in the war, and afterwards saw degradation at home. And whereas I, as a young man, should now be unemployed and unwanted, I owe it to Hitler that I have a marvelous job, made the more important by the very falseness of his own party's teaching. It is all right for my great uncle, because his life is now nearly over, but for our generation it is wonderful that we have at last got employment and something important to do. After all, I sometimes think that I would put up with almost anything if in my lifetime this feeling of defeat could be removed from the German army. I know much is bad in what the Nazis do, but it will not last. It is the sort of thing that happens in revolutions." A week later, I was repeating this conversation to a German scholar who had retired and lived in Koblenz. He had given a great deal of time to studying the history of the German army. He was old and wise, and very bitter about the Nazis. "Ach," he explained irritably, "it is what you call a gratitude complex these officers have for Hitler. It is terrible now that Hindenburg has gone, that the army is under oath to Hitler. These officers should see that they can only educate Germany if for some years the army takes control instead of the Nazis. But with the oath, it is very difficult. Some day they will have to break that oath, because one day it will be realized that it is only the army that can take control in Germany and throw the Nazis out. I am sure we must have a period with a kind of army dictatorship until we can get a constitutional government again, for after Hitler there is bound to be chaos. The fact that the officers feel they must compromise because of their oath to Hitler only makes things more difficult. It is just the same with many people outside the army," he continued. "If you look far enough, you will see there is conflict in many aspects of German life today. Too many people are comforting themselves by saying, 'Down with Nazi teaching,' at the same time as they say, 'Heil Hitler!' They do not seem to see that it is an impossible position, for all the time they are strengthening Hitler, even if they hate his teaching. One of the difficulties is that what I call this Thanksgiving complex is in the people as well as in the army. In spite of a certain reaction against the army after the last war, there is a very deep feeling in this country for the German army. There is in the Reich a deep desire that the army should again hold an honorable and powerful place. It is therefore true that many civilians talk about a sense of gratitude to the Führer for restoring the prestige of the army. Also, you must remember The Nazi propaganda has worked up a great sense of insecurity, because other countries round us had not disarmed, and Blomberg, for instance, talks about the people's birthright of defense. That is, of course, true, but it is also confused. You will find in many military families, like the one you know, that they will say, "At least one feels some reassurance in the knowledge that Germany is again something to be reckoned with in Europe, and is not just kicked about." Many of these things may be true, but it is very dangerous that the army should feel so bound up with Hitler, for though they do not think themselves Nazis, they will be in great difficulties. You will notice how in army circles they always talk of the party as "they" and never include themselves, but that state of affairs can hardly last. Anyhow, Himmler and the SS are determined to try to Nazify the army, and there is always the possibility of serious trouble between the SS and the army, because, he added, with a bitter laugh, there is no one who has a Thanksgiving complex for Himmler. Of course, if war comes, the party will have sooner or later to learn that there is only one power in this land, and that is the army, and not the SS or any other Nazi organization.